Princess Leonor is not more powerful than King Felipe. Not symbolically, not constitutionally, not in any practical sense you could point to. If you've seen that claim somewhere, it's not just an exaggeration, it's the inverse of reality. Felipe is the reigning head of state of Spain. Leonor, right now, today, holds no formal power at all. But the reason that claim spreads, and the reason it's worth spending 35 minutes taking apart properly, is that it touches something real and genuinely fascinating: the strange, deliberate, almost architectural way Spain is building Leonor's future authority years before she'll ever be allowed to use it. So let's talk about what power actually means in the Spanish crown, who really holds it, and why the gap between Felipe's authority today and Leonor's authority someday is so much bigger, and so much more interesting, than any clickbait title could capture. Let's start with the plain constitutional facts, because they matter more here than almost any other royal story we've covered. Under Title II of the Spanish Constitution, the king is defined as the head of state, the symbol of its unity and permanence, and the person who arbitrates and moderates the regular functioning of the institutions. Felipe VI holds that title. He sanctions and promulgates laws, he represents Spain in the highest form of international relations, he is the supreme commander of the armed forces. Leonor holds none of this. She holds the title Princess of Asturias, which is the traditional title given to the heir apparent, and under Article 57 of the Constitution she is next in the order of succession. That's it. That is the entire scope of her formal power right now: the right to inherit, someday, not the right to exercise, today. This isn't a technicality, it's the whole architecture of how constitutional monarchies work, and Spain follows this pattern closely. An heir is not a co-monarch, not a junior partner in governance, not someone who quietly wields influence behind the scenes. An heir is, constitutionally, a private citizen with an unusual job description and an extraordinary amount of public visibility, waiting on a line of succession that activates only when the reigning monarch dies or abdicates. Leonor cannot sign legislation. She cannot represent Spain in binding diplomatic capacities. She cannot act as regent unless very specific conditions are met, namely if Felipe becomes incapacitated and Leonor is of legal age, which she now is, but that provision exists only for emergencies, not for daily governance. Under normal circumstances, day to day, year to year, Felipe holds 100% of whatever formal authority the Spanish crown possesses, and Leonor holds 0. So where does a claim like, more powerful than Felipe, even come from? It usually comes from confusing two very different things: constitutional power and cultural momentum. And this is actually the useful, honest version of this story, so let's dig into it properly. Leonor has, in a very real sense, become the more discussed, more photographed, more emotionally invested figure in Spanish public life over the past 2 years, even while holding 0 formal authority. That's not the same as power, but it's also not nothing, and understanding the difference is the whole point of this video. Think about what's actually happened publicly over the past 3 years. Leonor completed 3 full years of military training across the Army, Navy, and Air and Space Force, becoming the first woman in Spanish royal history to go through the entire tri-service program. She graduated from the General Academy of Zaragoza, sailed aboard the training ship Juan Sebastián de Elcano, completed a parachuting course, and finished at the Academy of San Javier this past July with the Grand Cross of Aeronautical Merit, presented to her personally by her father. That's an extraordinary run of visible, hard, physically demanding public milestones for someone in her early 20s. Compare that to Felipe's own trajectory. He undertook military training 2 decades ago, but the scale of media coverage, the volume of international press attention, the sheer cultural saturation, is nothing like what Leonor has experienced in the social media era. Felipe became king in relative institutional quiet, inheriting the throne from his father's abdication in 2014 during a period when the monarchy badly needed exactly that: quiet competence rather than spectacle. Leonor is coming of age in a completely different media environment, one where every uniform fitting, every graduation ceremony, every summer photo at Merivent Palace becomes international content within hours. That visibility can feel, from the outside, like power. It isn't. But it's also not meaningless, and here's why. Public legitimacy is the resource a constitutional monarchy actually runs on, more than any legal authority. Felipe cannot force Parliament to do anything. He cannot veto legislation. His entire practical function is symbolic unity, and that function only works if the public actually believes in the institution enough to accept it as a unifying symbol rather than a costly anachronism. That belief is not guaranteed. Spain has a real, active republican political current, concentrated heavily in Catalonia and the Basque Country, and polling from institutions like the University of Murcia has repeatedly shown a country genuinely split on whether the monarchy should exist in its current form. Felipe's father, Juan Carlos, damaged that public legitimacy badly, through financial scandals and a widely mocked hunting trip amid a national recession, ultimately abdicating in 2014 and later leaving the country entirely for Abu Dhabi in 2020 amid corruption investigations. Felipe spent his reign so far rebuilding exactly that eroded legitimacy, distancing himself from his father's conduct, introducing a formal code of conduct for the family's finances, trying to make the monarchy boring again in the best possible sense, because boring, scandal-free consistency is what rebuilds institutional trust. Now here's where Leonor's role becomes genuinely significant, even without a shred of constitutional power. She represents Spain's best chance to fully complete that legitimacy rebuild, for a very simple reason: she has no scandal history to overcome. She's never been connected to a corruption investigation. She has no controversial past to explain away. What she has instead is an unusually public, unusually rigorous preparation record: 3 years of military service, a political science degree beginning this September at Carlos III University, a growing list of solo public appearances including her upcoming turn presiding over the Princess of Asturias Awards this October. Every one of these milestones functions as a deposit into an account of public trust that Felipe has spent his entire reign trying to refill. In that specific sense, and only that sense, Leonor may be accumulating something more valuable than Felipe's formal power: durable public goodwill, unencumbered by the baggage of the past, built specifically and deliberately for a reign that hasn't started yet. That's the real, honest version of Leonor versus Felipe, and it's worth being precise about it, because conflating public goodwill with actual power is exactly the kind of category error that produces misleading titles. Felipe holds the constitutional authority. Leonor is building the cultural and reputational capital that will determine whether the monarchy still commands public support by the time she's the one holding that authority, which, by all available signals, is likely decades away, given Felipe is in good health and Spanish monarchs have historically reigned well into old age. Let's talk about why the preparation itself is so unusually deliberate, because this is genuinely one of the more interesting royal succession stories happening in Europe right now, and it doesn't need any exaggeration to hold your attention. Felipe's own preparation for the throne, by his own household's later framing, was less structured than what Leonor has gone through. Leonor's military training across all 3 service branches was explicitly designed, according to statements from Felipe and Letizia in 2023, to strengthen her sense of duty and commitment while preparing her for the representational responsibilities she'll assume as heir, in line with Title II of the Constitution. That's not incidental language. It's the royal household explicitly stating that this entire multi-year process exists to build the exact kind of institutional credibility that took Felipe years of quiet, careful reign building to establish after his father's scandals. They are trying to give Leonor a head start that Felipe never had, essentially inoculating her reputation years in advance against the kind of legitimacy crisis that nearly broke the monarchy in the last decade. Her political science degree fits the same pattern. Beginning this September at Carlos III University's Getafe campus, she'll study a 4-year, multidisciplinary program covering political science, law, economics, sociology, history, and international relations, while continuing her institutional duties alongside her coursework. This isn't preparation for exercising power, because as we've established, the Spanish crown doesn't really have power to exercise in a governing sense. It's preparation for understanding, in granular technical detail, the machinery of the parliament and government she will spend her reign standing beside, symbolically bound to but never actually controlling. You send a future king or queen to study political science specifically because their entire job will be understanding power without holding it, representing a system without steering it. This is actually the part of the story that makes the more powerful than Felipe framing so misleading, because it flattens what's actually a much richer generational contrast. Felipe holds real, if narrow, constitutional authority right now, earned through a reign spent rebuilding trust after his father's exile. Leonor holds no authority at all, but she's being prepared with a level of institutional rigor, transparency, and public visibility that no previous Spanish heir has experienced, precisely because the monarchy cannot afford another legitimacy crisis and is trying to build her credibility in full public view, milestone by milestone, years in advance. That's not a power struggle between a king and his daughter. That's an institution, quite openly, trying to future-proof itself through the person it's counting on to carry it forward. There's also a structural reason this matters beyond just the Spanish royal family specifically. Leonor isn't alone in this pattern. Across Europe right now, a cohort of future monarchs, including Princess Isabella of Denmark undergoing her own military training, Princess Ariane of the Netherlands studying aerospace engineering at TU Delft, and Prince George beginning at Eton College, are all entering unusually structured, publicly documented preparation phases at roughly the same time. Constitutional monarchies across Europe appear to be converging on the same strategy: build public trust in the next generation early and visibly, because the old model of simply inheriting the crown and hoping the public goes along with it no longer reliably works in an era of instant global scrutiny and declining institutional deference generally. Leonor's rigorous, publicized preparation isn't unique to Spain. It's part of a broader recalibration happening across Europe's remaining monarchies, and Spain, given its more recent and more painful legitimacy crisis with Juan Carlos, has arguably more reason than most to take it seriously. So let's bring this back to the actual title, because by now the honest answer should be clear. Leonor is not more powerful than King Felipe, not constitutionally, not practically, not in any sense the Spanish Constitution recognizes. Felipe holds the entire formal authority of the crown, narrow as that authority is, and will continue to hold it for what is likely to be many years still. What Leonor holds instead is something different and, in its own way, just as consequential for the monarchy's long-term survival: an unusually public, unusually deliberate accumulation of institutional credibility, built specifically because the crown cannot afford to hand her a damaged reputation the way it was handed to Felipe. Her power, if you can call it that, isn't power at all yet. It's an investment, made in full public view, in the power she'll eventually inherit, and whether that investment pays off will depend less on any single ceremony or degree and more on whether Spain, as a country still genuinely divided on the question of monarchy itself, remains willing to accept the institution she's set to lead. That's a far more interesting story than a fake rivalry between a king and his daughter, and it's one we'll keep tracking as Leonor begins university this September, takes on her first solo Princess of Asturias awards this October, and moves, year by year, closer to a role she currently has absolutely no legal power to exercise. If you want the accurate version of these stories instead of the manufactured ones, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.